friend.
Hey.
I am so excited for today's episode. You have brought a gem of a person into my life. And we're going to dig deep with her today. We are going to be talking about opening the door or finding joy after burnout, which is something that we talk about burnout all the time, right?
hmm And so we have this incredible guest, Natalie Kuhn, who will be with us shortly. And
Mm.
something she's going to share with us is opening the door for these micro moments of joy when shit is hard.
And what better describes a big age besides the fact that shit is hard? For me, like physiologically, shit can be hard because I have IBS-C. But again, what better describes big age? Sometimes that shit get hard, dog, and we just need a release.
To shut. And anal. What's bigger age than pooping and anal?
Yeah, man. So I thank you for bringing her into our life because what I know is that this episode is going to land with our audience. Probably like no guest before because of what she's going to speak to us about today.
Totally. And the other thing that I think is really important to us is how are we providing a platform and information that's accessible to all of our viewers and listeners?
For sure.
And so there's a lot of things that people do to take care of themselves that are just not accessible. We talk about that all the time, right? Not everyone has health insurance, not everyone has access to culturally sensitive mental health support, right? But one of the things that I really like about Natalie is she talks about things that are just free for everyone.
Anyone can do it, incredibly low barrier. So without further ado, let's actually jump into our
Yes.
guest for today's episode.
Hi, everyone. So thrilled to be here with an incredible guest today, Natalie Kuhn. Welcome.
Thank you so much. You guys,
And
happy to be here.
oh, thank you. And we are going to be talking to Natalie about a lot of different things. But before we started taping, I was just sharing with Natalie kind of how I found her, which is just always like an not awkward, right, Shai? But like when you meet someone through the internet,
I know it's these parasocial relationships.
parasocial,
Right.
Yeah.
right? It's like it's like you're not dating.
And you're like, hey, girl, I know everything about you. I even know your dog's name, but actually, I don't know you.
Right, exactly. I was like, oh my gosh, she's wearing red lipstick. She always wears red lipstick. That's not creepy, Margo.
Right. It's a whole new world.
Funny.
But in this case, this relationship that you've been able to forge is one that we know is going to bless our community in today's episode.
So Natalie is a teacher at this company called The Class, which you will tell. It's an exercise somatic release yoga exercise. She'll explain it to you. And I had heard about it from some of my friends. They have gems in the floor.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Come on, Jim.
Yeah. So I had heard about it. I had never gone. I also, while I was going through my surgeries, had been recommended to start meditating more because, it was a lot of holding stuff. And I was connected to Natalie's partner, Kevin, who does weekly online meditations.
Ooh, okay.
And then I started seeing on his platform this like adorable woman who's Natalie and who teaches at The Class. And so subsequently I've taken a few of the classes once the world reopened and followed Natalie's story. And so I'm going to let Natalie share her story, but Natalie is here to kind of talk to us about opening the door for joy when maybe we get bad news, when we are worried, when the world feels heavy, which I think could be any time, but particularly for our listeners and viewers who are predominantly women and femmes and what we call big age, Natalie. So 35 to 50, where there's just a lot of things changing for us.
Yeah.
Many of us are in a sandwich sort of situation, taking care of children, taking care of elders, taking care of each other, having our own
Yeah.
health or emotional health challenges. And I think we have so much to learn from you about kind of both your personal story, but also how you encourage others.
Oh, God. Bless your heart. Well, thank you so much, Margo and Tashira, for having me on. The Valentine goes both ways because the way the two of you bring conversation into the world through your best friend relationship it's so important because they often talk about they often talk about romantic relationship, and that, romantic relationship struggles because we often try to put everything onto our partner when in fact we need the village. And just
Mm-hmm.
outside of that romantic partnership, the most critical person, I think, is the best friend, the
Talk
ride or
about it.
dies.
Yeah.
And the fact that you guys are saying, hey, this is a core part of our lives, and you're sharing that with us, it's so important. It's such
That's
medicine.
beautiful. Thank
So thank
you.
you for inviting me on
Oh,
into this sacred container of best friendship. I'm so thrilled that your path to finding me and for us connecting was through my partner Kevin. So he, to your point, he's 25 years a meditation and philosophy teacher,
Mm.
and he was very much present for the early days of the class. And Tashira, I know the class is new for you and probably to a lot of your listeners. So if I could just give a
yes.
moment of like, what is the class? The class is a workout that combines fitness and mindfulness, but that's really the most kind of dry way I can say it. The class is really using the structure of fitness, very relatable moves, squats, jumping jacks, nothing that you haven't seen before. But instead of using it for the proliferation of some toxic idea that you need to look some sort of way to fit into some story the culture has made up, they're saying, why don't we use fitness to get to the mind and the heart?
Mm.
What if we used it for a different way? What if it wasn't punishment? What if it was actually a means to befriending the mind and releasing the the heart? So the things that come up in our days and in our weeks, the hamster wheel mind, the emotional entrapments we find ourselves in, we actually can use the body through strength training, through powerful, evocative music, through a teacher who's guiding you to be observant of your experience, um, to release yourself of the weight of our lives and actually step into something that feels more like you, a return to yourself
Mm.
in these practices.
That sounds amazing.
That's kind of the
Sign me
longer
up.
version of it.
Sign
So is
me
that how
up.
you met Kevin?
That is how I met Kevin. Yeah, about 11 years ago, I met the founder, Taryn Toomey, through happenstance, and she invited me to take it. It didn't have a name at the time. She said, "Oh, I'd love for you to take this class. I'm just trying it out in the gym of my apartment building and just doing it for a couple of friends." And at the time, she had had her second child, and she had a lot of fire. It's that initiation of motherhood, right, that she was going through, and she was a yoga teacher, and yoga just wasn't providing her the same kind of catharsis that she was really needing. So
Mm.
I joined her in the gym of her apartment building, and I mean, I laughed, I cried. It was so physically hard, but more than that, there was something else bubbling that took a couple of years to keep rising to the surface. And ultimately, it was the shape, the method of catharsis, of somatic release. But at the time, 11 years ago, nobody was talking about somatics.
Yeah, I
Nobody
know.
was
I was
talking about
gonna say, so
mindfulness.
when you guys started the class, that was the question I had. Were you talking about somatic release? Or was it just
Uh,
like, oh, this
you
thing
know,
happened
behind
and
behind closed doors,
yeah.
we were using words like embodiment and somatics and mindfulness, but not in front of
Yeah, not
students,
the
because no, at that time, 11 years ago, yoga had kind of hit its crescendo of,
Mm.
wow, this thing, meditation had just kind of come up, and I think Headspace had just
Oh, I
launched.
remember
So
Headspace.
it
Yeah.
really was a different time. So what we were talking about was, like, hear your thoughts, which now we know is mindfulness. You know, uh, tapping your heels and tapping your body, which we never said was qigong because that wasn't culturally part of, you
hmm.
know, wasn't in the lexicon really for many people. But now we are able to say, yeah, these are somatic practices, these are embodiment practices, that are helping to train your mind and your heart to move the energy it's holding through this through this body you have.
And how would you describe somatic practices or somatics for folks who have no idea what we're talking about
Yeah.
right now?
Somatics comes from the etymology of the word somatics comes from the root soma, which just means body. So anything that connects you to that thing underneath your neck. You know what I mean? Because we're walking around most of the day just so in our thoughts, so trapped in these repetitive thinking cycles that we
Mhm.
forget that we have this whole other thing underneath our neck. And that's really in total, that's the body. And somatics is a way of saying practice coming back into your body.
I see.
Mm.
Thank you for that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So, oh well, to circle back, uh, Taryn was one of Kevin's teachers. He was a yoga teacher at a studio in downtown Manhattan, and then Taryn and Kevin used to lead retreats together, and I used to produce them. And anyway, Taryn and I built this business together starting in 2013, and JC was one of the original teachers, and it was just the three of us for many years, 3 year, 2.5, 3 years, and then slowly but surely, once we um, really understood what this method, how this method was taking shape, we started to bring on more folks. And now, 11 years later, I'm proud to say that we are a digital wellness
Yeah, they have a
company
digital
offering
platform.
this
Ooh,
signature method to 74 different countries
I love
from two
that.
headquarters, one in New York and one in LA. So
And do you teach
that's now what it is.
In the LA location now?
Now, yeah, last summer I moved to LA and I teach 2 classes a week from our Santa Monica studio. Yeah.
Today's episode is sponsored by us, our new supporter status on our
Yay!
website. We're asking our community, folks who listen and view and watch us and enjoy our content, to engage with us as a monthly supporter at $5 a month. This is a much lower threshold than the private community. We have heard from a lot of people, and we're so grateful that we have, that people want to support, but either the private community is just not something either in their budget or in their time
Yes.
that they have accessible to them. But hopefully the $5 a month is something that feels more accessible, and it will be vital for us to continue producing really high quality content.
And we cannot wait to have you all as a monthly paid supporter. The link will be down below. So, I mean, it sounds like we have so much to learn from you, but specifically
Oh,
about today's topic, you thought that Natalie would be an excellent guest because of this idea of choosing joy.
Well, also, yes, so the idea of choosing joy amongst unspeakable grief or fear, but
okay.
also like holding your humanity at the same time. And
Mm-hmm.
so you
Mm.
said earlier something that was, I chuckled, not because it was funny, but I was thinking like, oh, like Natalie and Kevin fight? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because I think we hold wellness practitioners and people we look up to as kind of like other worldly or
Yes,
something,
no,
but
for
you're just a
sure.
human too in a relationship.
Please,
Right?
like, tell me about
Well,
it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I
fallible.
think that is
Yeah.
something that Tashara and I really try to hold space for both
Mm-hmm.
with this platform. Like, what are we trying to do? What are we aspiring to do? And what are we actually doing? And sometimes maybe we're just going to have a glass of wine with a friend. And you know what?
Yep.
That is what is going to make me feel good at the moment, or we're going to take a walk or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that I was hoping we could talk about with you is like tips and learning from you about how you navigated this past year with
Mm-hmm.
Kevin's diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I know I just learned that you lost your mom, um,
Mm. So
which,
yeah, 10 years ago I lost my mom. So it's been a while, but that was my first foray into grief. And then
Mm.
last year, actually almost to the day, a week ago last year, Kevin was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic cancer, and without intervention, he'd have 2 years to live.
Mm.
So the past year has been deconstructive and formative all at the same time.
Wow.
So we got hit with this diagnosis. And at the time, I was the co CEO of the business. So I was running the business. And then also, for many caregivers, I know that you'll respond to this of, you know, also being the CEO of cancer treatment,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
your
as
home.
a care and in the internal, in the more private space, in the intimate space. And those two things, being caregiver and co-CEO, um, I didn't even stop to think, how are you doing? Because there were so many people to take care of, including him, including family members that had questions about what was going on, his community that had a lot of questions, my teams, that everybody had to keep moving, everything has to keep going. And for a while there, I really was running on pure adrenaline and didn't know it.
Were you sleeping,
You know,
Natalie?
no. I found myself in the wee hours ruminating around fear, around stress, around worry constantly.
Mhm.
And even though I'm a spiritual teacher of, many, many years, I had some awareness that I was kind of trapped in my own um, hamster wheel and still unable to get it to stop, which had its own sense of weight and
Mhm.
gravity. Like, shouldn't I know better?
Yeah.
shouldn't I teach my way out of this insanity? There was a lot of personal and private shame that came with feeling so much suffering. And I was using the practice of the class to try to break free of my own thickness. Gravity is really the only way I can think about it. And even though I feel like I am a very naturally joyful person, I would find pockets of joy, but not at the frequency at which I know myself to live at. And I think anybody, I mean, you ladies have gone through so much in your own life. There is a moment where you think to yourself, where did I go?
Mm.
What happened? And it's only after this gradual erosion of self are we able to pick our head up above the quicksand and say, hold on, I don't recognize not only myself but I don't recognize myself in the world. And that is eventually, what did happen for me. And only looking back on it can I give it a name, and that name is burnout.
Mhm.
And I think that, if for many people, I would dare to say that there's a sense of global burnout right now
Mhm.
because of what's going on in our greater world. And then if we're brave enough to also see what's going on in our world, um, I really do think that there is some unchecked, unseen sense of global burnout amongst us all. Um, And for me, what that looked like was not just being a participant of the earth, not being just a participant of, you know, living in America, but being a participant of being a leader in the business arena, and then being a caretaker
Mm.
in my personal life. And one of the first things that happens in burnout, and I wonder if you guys can, if you have felt this in your own life, is that we neglect our own sense of aliveness. We neglect our own sense of health, our own sense of joy
Mm.
in the world. And then um, it's a gradual path toward recovery.
Yeah.
Our own sense of aliveness. So I've gleaned already so much, but so you said that, whoa, mind blown. And earlier today, Tashira said something about you just have to have the courageous conversation.
Mhm.
Mm,
And I was like, because we talk a lot about hard
yeah.
conversations or,
Yeah, the
depression,
courageous
anxiety,
one,
right?
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
Tashira, what my teacher says about that is my teacher, his name is David White, he's a philosopher and a poet. He says that the courageous conversation is the one that you don't want to have.
Mhm. Including conversations with
Yourself.
yourself Absolutely. So that's what I'm really curious about, because I think when we go through difficult and trying and challenging times, our first instinct is just to put our nose to the ground, just grind and to see it through the other side. But when was the moment that you looked up, Natalie, like to use your metaphor, your head rose above the quicksand and you were like, shit, I have completely neglected my well-being in this
Hmm.
process.
Yeah. Do you know, I was crying all the time. I
Mm.
was so tired but couldn't sleep. And I found myself cynical. And there was a moment at the end of last summer where we finally took a vacation amidst, we moved from New York to LA in an instant to find the right clinical trial. I didn't take a day off because work was it was
Yeah.
actually some kind of distorted version of relief
Oh, we
because
can
it
talk
wasn't
about that.
cancer. Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
Okay. Great. Okay. I realized that I was in the midst of, I call it the three symptoms of burnout. And maybe other people have a different way for it, but I would say for me, the three symptoms of burnout are cynicism, the erosion of engagement, of participating in your life, um, indifference,
Mm.
the erosion of passion when the light dims, and disproportionate irritability,
Hmm.
which I think is the erosion of compassion, where the
Mm.
littlest things get you riled up. And it wasn't until I finally took a vacation, and that vacation was not like sit by the beach. It was like sleep all day and all
Yeah.
night, where I thought, this is not normal. And that's where I started to have the courageous conversation with myself and with my partner and say, what is going, I don't recognize myself. And, and the courageous conversation, to your point, when we start to realize, wow, I'm really under the weight of cynicism and indifference and irritability. Um, what needs to happen in order to make my way back toward who I know myself to be, one who is full of aliveness, one who does experience joy.
Mm.
And I would say that the cure is undoing and silence.
Mm.
Undoing and silence. Okay.
Undoing, right? Because in under the weight of the responsibilities that we have in our lives, whatever the identity structure is, for me it was caregiving and leadership, but for other people there's motherhood, there's so many different ways that our identities take on the weight of responsibility. But if we don't have the opportunity to not do,
Yeah.
and in the not doing undo what has led us to this point,
Yeah.
we're just going to keep on. The momentum of doing keeps us locked in place.
That resonates so deeply with me, Natalie. I mean, I think I've really struggled from burnout for a long, long time, but kind of the pinnacle for me was when I was recovering from my double mastectomy, and everyone was so worried. To your point about not everyone, but like people in my community were really worried about me because I had never slowed down,
Right.
and I had to, right? Like I never took a maternity leave. I was like on a path. I was an academic for a really long time and an advocate, and I was like, no, I'm going to do this thing and be a mom and do this thing, and and so people were like, oh my gosh, is Margo going to be okay? And I was so good, and it was the first time I had slowed down in I think my
Maybe
whole
ever.
life.
Maybe ever. Yeah.
'Cause
Mm,
and that was when I was like, something has to change. I can't be 40 years old recovering from a double mastectomy and thinking that this is the best time in my life.
Oof.
right.
That's just not. But to your point about burnout, like it's very scary, right? Because you lose yourself. Like you don't recognize yourself.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think that moment of so how do you make your way back to finding yourself again?
Yeah,
How do
that's
you make your way back into that space? And Tashira, I'm just going to keep coming back to what you said about this courageous conversation. And I think that where that emergency brake gets pulled, Margo, to your point, like, where do we go from here, is really getting present. Because joy isn't an outcome, right? Joy is not something that we can get to. It's not a destination. It's not an outcome. If I just have enough medals, then I'll be joyful. If I'm free of cancer, then I'll be joyful. If it's not like this thing, and then I will. To me, joy is a frequency that rushes into your life from being devotionally present to your life as it is. And that's where I found myself being like, wait, hold on. Who am I? What has happened? And then it's gradual, right? It's gradual. Where have I let myself continually say yes when I really meant no?
Mm-hmm.
Where have I continually allowed myself to be called by outside forces instead of inside forces? And
I've just gotta,
yeah.
I've got to stop you, Nellie. I'm sorry, because what we say in the South is you preaching. And you are preaching to not just my soul, but I'm sure everyone who is under the sound of your voice. And there is something about just your intonation and the cadence of your voice that is powerful right now. And so I
Wow,
just have to
thank you.
pause and say that, because speaking of frequency, I think the vibration right now is just so high, and I'm grateful. But please
Oh,
continue.
Tashira, thank you, and Margo, thank you.
Oh,
I'm honored to be able to be here with you in this. I'm passionate about it because I really believe that we are not meant to be on the earth to burn ourselves out. We're not meant to live in the ashes of our spirit. We are meant to be in this full, robust incarnation of our spirit and our soul. And I do think that for me, I had to pull the emergency brake. I did have to stop a lot of the things that were happening in my life. Gratefully, one of the things that stopped on its own was the fact that Kevin, 10 months after after the start of his clinical trial, recovered and is in full remission from cancer. And that was a great, profound, deep relief and release.
Absolutely.
And not everybody is
Congratulations.
that lucky, right? But for me, that was my personal circumstances. And then also, I chose to leave the seat of co-CEO of the business, and I'm wrapping up my last couple of weeks right now in the transition. But not everybody's form of recovering from burnout needs to be that extreme.
we've
I
talked about
do
that.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, and for me, there's really four paths to recovering, to setting yourself free, to making your way back to joy, back to aliveness, and each one comes through the presence, the doorway of presence. And I think the first one is to take breaks so that the momentum of your meetings is interrupted. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that break can just be eat your lunch, number one, eat your lunch with a fork that's real, and put your lunch on a plate. Now, this seems so
Put your lunch on a plate.
mundane. This seems so mundane, but how many times are we eating lunch out of a wrapper,
Mm-hmm.
out of styrofoam, in front of a screen?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Put your lunch on a plate, eat with a fork, and taste your food.
And for
That
me,
would
it's
say that's
standing.
like
Sit down.
a
Yeah.
standing. Right. And so I would say take a break. The second one is I think do one thing in nature a day. It doesn't need to be an hour. If you've got an hour, great. But do one thing. I take my dog on a walk every morning before the day gets going. And that walk, I don't bring my phone, I don't bring earphones. It's just a time for me to do the thing that's in front of me. Walk.
Beautiful.
Look at the sky, acknowledge what it looks like, what the weather is. The third one I would say is move your energy. For me, that was weep the unwept tears.
Mm.
Weep the unwept tears with your girlfriends, with your partner, alone. But moving the energy could also look like working out. It could also look like breath work. It could look like dancing to music. It could be, going to a concert. It could be putting on one 3-minute pop song that you love and just getting crazy in your kitchen. But you move the energy, because burnout is also a state of stagnancy.
Mm.
And moving the energy in some way through some form of expression helps it unlock from its freeze position. And then the last one is a line from a poem that one of my other teachers wrote. It's called, the poem is called Blessing for One Who is Exhausted. And the line is, be excessively gentle with yourself. Be excessively gentle with yourself. And I think these 4 things, all 4 of them are free. All 4 of them don't need you to go to India and study with a guru. And, all 4 of them are very actionable, everyday, free moments that can bring ourselves, our spirit back into the body and reconnect us with who we know ourselves to be. And gradually we'll come back to ourselves with a new respect for our needs, a new respect for who we desire to become, and a new respect for what brings us joy, which is always the pathway through presence.
I love this idea of respect for what brings us joy, right? Because that, for me, requires a certain amount of excessive gentleness. Also, it requires an admiration. It requires for us to hold it and to be gentle with it in a way that I can almost succeed. And it,
Hmm.
it, it gives it for me a whole different meaning.
Can I? Something that there's 2 things that I can't stop thinking about from what you just said and what you just said. And I don't want to speak for you, but I'll speak for me, but I think you might agree. One of the things that I think Tashira and I have matured into or stepped into over the last couple of years with this new endeavor and just where we are in our lives is this ability to say what we need when we need it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we're gentle with ourselves.
At all.
So I think that we'll say the thing or we'll do the thing like, I can't go to that dinner. I'm too tired. Like we'll say that, but then we'll feel bad about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or, I'm gonna cancel plan. I guess canceling plans is an example, but like, I'm going to like, I'm gonna do some body work because my body is like out of alignment.
Right.
And I know this is what I need, and then feel like, oh my God, I'm so extra that like I just got a massage.
Right.
I feel so guilty that I'm spending money on myself that way.
Right.
So then would you say, Natalie, that it's a bit of, I guess with everything, a practice or a journey?
100,000% is it both a practice and a journey. But I would say also that the body hears not only the words that you do say, but the body is also hearing the words that you don't say. So if you are saying, yes, oh, I absolutely cannot wait to go to dinner with you for my 5th, engagement of the week, when I'm actually saying, I'm so tired and I'm secretly hoping that you're going to cancel. The body is listening to both. And the body is getting mixed messages and is confused. And therefore, if you're saying yes, but you mean no, you're keeping yourself in this stuck form of inexpression.
Ooh, my goodness.
So, Natalie, we have to go, but I'm wondering, you've given us so many amazing tools to both help us understand where we are and how to move through challenging feelings, moments. But I'm wondering if you can just share some actual steps. Like, what did you do, if to the extent you feel comfortable sharing, when you heard about Kevin's cancer? Like, how did you respond in those moments when your loved one, when your partner got bad news? Because that's something that we hear a lot about from our community. Like, how did you respond when you had to make that
Yeah.
decision. And I think for someone who has studied and teaches and people look up to, we would love to learn from you how you gave yourself grace, how you showed love for yourself and for Kevin, and, you know, continued being the mogul that you are, all kind of
Mm,
within the same couple of breaths.
thank you. Well, I I have to say, my reaction was a reaction. It wasn't a response. It wasn't based in conscious awareness and being centered and grounded. When I found out that his diagnosis was stage 4, I went into pure reactivity, which is to say, I went into my own wound. And my own wound was fix it at all costs, do whatever it takes, get it done, don't take breaks. Everything that I mentioned was the antidote to
Mhm.
burnout. I did the opposite. So
I see.
these are hard won offerings,
Mm-hmm.
because I was not the spiritual teacher Natalie when I got the diagnosis. I was the incredibly fallible, imperfect, human, wounded, broken version of myself that just went into hyperdrive.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only through be, going to the bottom of the well myself, becoming brittle, becoming, well, all of the symptoms, cynical, indifferent, disproportionately irritable, that I started to slowly take these steps back into a sense of personal recovery. And, did start to take long walks when I could get them. I did start to eat food on a plate and outside of a screen. Eventually, I started to cry the unwept tears and move through the energy that was so volatile and keeping my nervous system in a peak state. And I'm still very much practicing being kind and gentle to myself. And it's not just a daily practice of remembering, it's an hourly, if not minute to minute,
Mm-hmm.
um, requirement, I would
Yeah.
say, of returning to myself.
Thank
And
you
I forget
for,
all the time. This is not one of
That's
these.
actually really good for people to hear.
yeah.
Natalie forgets all the time, everyone.
All the
So
time.
we can forget too sometimes.
Well, I was about to say, thank you for reminding us of the requirement that it
Yeah.
is mindful work and it takes minutes, if not seconds, of having to remind ourselves of what we need to be our best, even when we are going through challenging circumstances. And so I don't know about everybody else, but I want to know more about these 4 points about like bouncing back from burnout. How can we engage with you more, some of these concepts and
Mm,
these teachings moving forward?
thank you. That's so nice. Well, if you'd like to join me and the amazing team of class teachers on the mat for the workout, just go to theclass.com, or on Instagram, it's at the class. And for some of these teachings and Dharma talks and sort of pathways through spirit and soul, you can find me on Instagram at this is Natalie. This is Natalie. Take it or leave it. This is Natalie.
I love it.
We're gonna take it.
Yeah, and
We're
everything will be
gonna
linked
take
down below.
we're gonna link you and take you, and hopefully you'd be willing to come back at some point. Um,
I'd
but
be
thank you for your
honored.
time, Natalie. Oh my gosh, so much.
Margo
Absolutely.
Tashira, thank you so much for creating the space for this conversation to happen, but also for leading so many women through a more awakened path through your friendship and through this podcast. It's an honor.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you,
tell Kevin
Natalie.
and you we're so happy that he's better.
I will.
It's
Thank you.
wonderful. So, Tashira, whoa.
Margo, I can barely speak. Understand that every part of me is just ignited, on fire, ready to just change and dedicate myself to a higher state of being.
So, I don't know if you noticed, but I had to work really hard not to like overwhelm her with how much I love her. You know, it's just a weird thing having followed someone on the internet that you don't know for years and then to be in conversation with them in real life. Like, I feel like Natalie's my friend, but I have never spoken to her before today.
Margo, people feel that way about you. You
Mm.
do realize that when we go to our live events, they're like, "So how's Josh?"
I don't know. I mean, I really admire her.
For sure.
And I think that she is creating a lane for women that hasn't been I mean, maybe it's been done before, but I've never seen it.
Well, let's talk about it. I mean, first of all, the class. I think I have to go and experience that for myself.
It's wild.
Okay. Okay. I will take wild. Let's see. Remember we used to say we wanted to try different types of like classes?
Yeah, that was one of my first ideas with the podcast, was to do a vlog of remember, you were going to plan a day for me and I was going to plan a day for
We
you.
need to do this. We need to do this.
And then I was like, "Oh, and in addition, we should do different exercise classes." So I would take you to like a crazy boot camp class and you would take me to Pilates
Yeah.
or
Okay, we need to do this and we need to include the class. So that was the first thing that
Okay.
definitely stood out to me. But the second thing was to go back to your intro about how the advice that she shared was so low barrier. And it made me feel like, because we often feel burnout, we talk about this all the time here on the podcast, and I know our watchers can relate. But this idea that just getting up in the morning and going for a walk, just crying,
the unwept tears.
my God. Mm, mm, mm. Because we're holding so much in when we are in these seasons of very high stress that lead to burnout. And so being able to just release it, I thought to myself, I went through an entire breakup with a platform and damn near had a whole nervous breakdown because I did not cry the unwept tears. And the moment that I allowed myself to do so, it was so cathartic. It was a tremendous release. And so I could definitely relate to that. But what about you?
I really appreciated, I mean, everything, but one of the things, I don't know if you've noticed this about me, is sometimes I'm kind of all or nothing.
Mm,
And I really want to welcome in during this season the kind of being a little bit softer and knowing that it's not all or nothing, right? So even just taking a walk around the block without my phone, that is a successful way of holding space for myself
and moving.
and moving the energy, right? Or eating on a plate.
So small.
I mean, I know all these things, but just like thinking about them as like, just try to do each of these things a day. Moving energy, the walk, the morning walk,
Mhm.
the eating, sitting on a plate, not looking at a screen.
Yep.
And what was the
I know she said excessive gentleness at some point,
Oh,
and
crying the unwept
and
tears.
crying the unwept tears. Yeah.
I don't know if I can cry every day.
But she gave an example of it, like, it didn't have to always be, like, literal crying, right? There are other ways that I think we can connect to ourselves deeply that still will get to that point.
Yeah.
Part of it, I think, is just facing that thing about ourselves that we don't necessarily want to. And we've recognized that sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is not to face every single part of ourselves and be in active healing at that time. But when it comes down to burnout, we've got to have the moment of release.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that kind of really aligned with something I've been thinking about is there's so many things now and forever in all of our lives to be sad about,
Yeah, for sure.
right? And we can think about more. But and I think many of us might also wish some parts or aspects of our lives were different. And it's really easy to kind of like get wound up about those things. Like, I
Yeah.
wish my family were more normal, or I wish, had this job, or I wish I had this house, or I wish I had this type of relationship. And just to be like, this is it. You know, I'm sorry for that person who can't do that thing and it has affected me, but I am not going to let that ruin my day.
Yeah. It is a choice. And we can create a heaven or a hell of our own making.
Mm.
And I think when times get to be the most chaotic and the most challenging in our lives, it's this idea of just Small acts of joy, these small things that can disrupt the matrix and to get us off of autopilot that I think are going to pay big dividends at the end. And I'm just so grateful for Natalie for sharing that story.
Yeah, and I really kind of want everyone to follow Natalie.
For
I'm
sure.
really excited to, we just learned today about her next professional step. She's still going to be teaching at the class, but she's stepping down as co-CEO from the business side
Okay.
to start her own thing. So I am really excited, and let's see how we can work with her.
And I'm sure it will not be the last time you hear from Natalie here on justUS. But in the meantime, you all let us know below, how are you healing from burnout? How are you finding moments of joy? Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and we will see you good people next time. Thanks for listening to justUS. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to learn more about our podcast, be sure to check us out on our website at justuspodcast.com. You can also reach out to us there if you want to be featured on the show, or if you have a business or a product that you think would be a good fit for our audience. Thanks again for listening.